So, what if the reason we can't, eradicate the world's darkest, most persistent exploitations isn't because of a lack of laws, or a shortage of police, or even a failure of modern education?
Right. It's what we always assume it is.
Exactly. But what if the real reason is that we're fundamentally misunderstanding human biology?
Man, it is a deeply uncomfortable question to ask. I mean, it suggests that all the modern tools we rely on to fix society might be, well, they might be entirely the wrong instruments for the job.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're looking at today. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we are exploring an argument that really forces us to look at one of society's most devastating issues, sexual exploitation through, like, an entirely different lens.
It's a complete paradigm shift.
It really is. We are going to explore a radical reframing of why this issue simply refuses to disappear, despite all our modern advancements, and what it actually takes to stop it at the source.
Right. And to do that, we are unpacking a highly provocative, very philosophical paper written by Lev Neymotin. It was published in Uncompressed Thinking.
And the title is pretty intense, right?
Yeah, it is. It's titled Rebel Against Sexual Slavery, or Return to 'Tis Night as the Only Serious Defense Against a Biological Force.
Now, to give you some context, you should know that this paper was written as a direct, critical response to an article by Eden Farber from March 2026, which was in Prophecy, a journal for tomorrow.
Yeah, and Farber's piece was essentially this massive rallying cry, just a demand for society to rise up and end these abuses once and for all.
And Neymotin read that and basically replied like, hey, your outrage is completely justified, but your strategy is structurally doomed.
I'm sure it would doom, yeah.
Now, before we get into the weeds here, I want to be incredibly clear with you, the listener. The source material we are unpacking today touches on some highly charged intersections. We're talking secularism, religion, biology, deep societal values.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
Very heavy. So our job today is not to take sides. We are not endorsing the religious or political or social viewpoints of the author. We are simply acting as impartial guides to convey and unpack the fascinating, incredibly complex ideas contained in this original text.
Because regardless of where you stand personally, on religion or secularism, the argument Neymotin makes forces a really rigorous, almost surgical re-examination of how we approach systemic societal harm.
Right.
He is basically asking us to look at the actual machinery of human desire itself.
Okay, let's unpack this. The paper actually provides a cover image that I think we need to visualize before we go any further because it sets the stage perfectly.
The silhouette image. Yeah, that one is striking.
It is. It's this stark, pitch-black silhouette of a human figure. But right in the center, occupying the chest and torso, there is this glowing, intensely fiery core.
Like a contained star, almost.
Exactly. And the text stamped over it reads, Biology vs. Restraint, with the subtitle, SNE Art 2.
And that image perfectly visually encapsulates the entire thesis of this deep dive. The author is positing that the true battleground against exploitation is not outside. It's not in the world of criminal justice or trafficking rings or corrupt networks.
It's all internal.
Exactly. The battleground is entirely within the human being. That fiery core is the issue.
Wow. Okay, so let's start with the catalyst for all of this. Eden Farber wrote that article making a passionate, morally urgent call to, quote, rebel against sexual slavery.
Right.
And Neymotin starts his paper by entirely agreeing with the moral outrage. He explicitly states that sexual exploitation is one of the most degrading phenomena in human society.
Yeah, he doesn't downplay it at all.
Yeah.
He says its persistence is an absolute intolerable horror.
But then, and this is where it gets interesting, he makes a pivot that completely changes the trajectory of the conversation. He argues that calling for a rebellion is incomplete. He writes that it gives us heat, but not structure.
Heat, but not structure. Which makes sense, because rebellions, by their very nature, need an external enemy. You rebel against a dictator. You rebel against an oppressive institution.
Right. In this context, society rebels against the traffickers, the pimps, the networks.
Exactly. And the people purchasing sex. And Neymotin says, yes, absolutely pursue those actors with the full force of the law. But, and here is the critical analytical leap, those external actors did not invent the appetite they are monetizing.
They didn't invent it, they're just
harvesting it. They are the supply chain. If a rebellion only targets the visible external agents of exploitation, it completely fails to name the engine that is generating the demand in the first place.
And this leads to the core thesis of the paper, the real paradigm shift here.
Mm.
The author argues that the demand driving sexual exploitation isn't merely a byproduct of culture.
Right. It's not just an economic market force.
No. And it's not simply socially conditioned behavior that can just be, like, unlearned in classroom. It is primal. It is biological. He describes it as the God-given drive to multiply.
Which is, by definition, one of the most internal, ancient, powerful forces in human nature.
Yeah. And the logic he follows is quite stark.
It really is. Because if this primal biological drive is left insufficiently governed within the individual, its natural physical tendency is to move toward demand. It constantly seeks an outlet.
It has to go somewhere.
Exactly. And wherever that massive, ungoverned demand intersects with human vulnerability, exploitation is the mathematical, inevitable result.
So let me offer an analogy to help conceptualize the mechanics of what the author is saying here. Imagine a town located downstream from a massive, roaring river that continuously overflows and destroys the homes.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Our current societal approach, according to this text, is like trying to stop the flood by yelling at the water, or maybe arresting the opportunists who are price gouging life rafts during the disaster.
Right, dealing with the aftermath.
Exactly. We are frantically filling sandbags and building higher walls around the houses, but we are completely ignoring the fact that the river itself originates from this inexhaustible high-pressure spring miles away in the mountains.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we are fighting the physics of the water at the exact moment it hits the town, while completely ignoring the source. What we actually need is a structural dam built right at the spring.
That is precisely the dynamic Nemotin is diagnosing. We are fighting the floodwaters of exploitation while ignoring the biological spring. Which brings us to the next logical phase of his argument.
Right. Why our current tools are failing.
Yeah. Why our modern secular toolkit is fundamentally failing to contain this river. What's fascinating here is how systematically the author breaks down the structural weakness of the tools we currently use.
Like laws and police.
Exactly. Think about our primary defenses: civil law, criminal law, police action, rescue organizations. Now, Nemotin is very careful to state that these are indispensable.
They save lives, obviously.
They do. They rescue people. But structurally, they are fundamentally weak because they are inherently external. They operate entirely downstream.
So they only intervene after a violation has already occurred.
Right. Or they attempt to deter behavior through the threat of external punishment. Like, don't do this or you'll go to jail. But they do not enter what the author brilliantly terms the inner theater.
The inner theater, I love that phrase.
That is so good. It's that private, solitary space in the human mind where the biological drive first forms its momentum. The police cannot be stationed inside your prefrontal cortex.
Right.
The law cannot be physically present at the exact microsecond. An impulse begins to metastasize into an appetite.
Okay, but I'm struggling with this a bit, and I want to push back on behalf of anyone listening who might be thinking, wait a minute, what about our modern culture of education?
Like philosophy and awareness campaigns.
Yeah. It sounds like he is entirely dismissing progressive awareness. I mean, we have massive public awareness campaigns now. We have consent workshops in universities. We teach the philosophy of mutual respect. Doesn't that kind of education rewire the inner theater just as well as any ancient religious framework?
It's a fair question.
Why can't we just educate people to be better?
It's definitely the most natural counterargument to make, and the author anticipates it directly. His rebuttal is rooted in the practical psychology of how humans actually operate under pressure.
Okay, how so?
Well, philosophy, he writes, might clarify our thoughts. A consent workshop might illuminate a concept or persuade our logical brain. But philosophy does not command.
Oh, it doesn't have teeth when it matters.
Exactly the point. In the face of a biological force as ancient, internal, and overwhelmingly powerful as the reproductive drive, abstract principles are simply too fragile.
They just break under the pressure.
Think about the physical reality of a primal urge. When the biological drive surges, an abstract philosophical concept you read in a syllabus 3 months ago lacks the daily intimacy and the absolute moral authority needed to actually resist that instinct.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Philosophy suggests a better path, sure, but it does not bind the human conscience in the visceral, non-negotiable way that is required to govern biological appetite at its absolute source.
So it's not that laws or educational campaigns are bad. It's just that they are structurally incapable of entering the room where the fundamental decision is actually made.
They're just the wrong tool for that specific job.
Right. So if external laws act too late and secular philosophy is too weak to command the inner theater, what actually works?
And this is where the narrative makes its most controversial yet fascinating transition.
Yeah, the author argues that there is only one historical framework capable of reaching the root, and that is religion. Specifically, he points to the Jewish concept of Tanut.
And we really need to pause here and unpack this, because Tzniut is widely and sometimes aggressively misunderstood in modern discourse.
Yes. Here's where it gets really interesting. The author vehemently argues against flattening Tzniut into this superficial, almost cartoonish idea of just a modest dress code.
Right, that's what most people think it is.
Exactly. He says that reducing it to a set of rules about hemlines or sleeves misses the entire psychological and spiritual mechanism of what it actually does.
According to the text, Tzniut is not a wardrobe choice. It is a comprehensive architecture.
An architecture.
Yes, it is an entire immersive framework of dignity, self-restraint, mutual respect, and disciplined conduct before God. It does not operate under the utopian delusion that men are angels.
Right. It doesn't pretend the drive isn't there.
No, it doesn't pretend that if you are sufficiently religious, sexual desire magically vanishes.
It's incredibly realistic about human nature.
It is arguably more realistic than modern secularism. The text actually praises Judaism's sobriety on this issue. Instead of trying to educate the desire away or pretend it's just a social construct, Tzniut acknowledges the staggering power of the biology.
But it changes how you interact with it.
Exactly. It places the giver of that drive, meaning God, firmly inside the mental field of the person bearing it. It shifts the entire context of the biological urge.
I want you, the listener, to really think about the profound psychological difference here. Think about the last time you were tempted to do something you knew you shouldn't, big or small.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Consider the difference between not doing something simply because it's illegal and you are afraid of getting caught by a camera or a cop versus not doing something because you view your own internal impulses as subjects to a higher, ever-present, non-negotiable moral authority.
It is the shift from external compliance to internal governance. Yeah. Because if your restraint relies on external compliance, what happens when the cameras are off? What happens when the law is looking the other way? Or when you have enough money or power to insulate yourself from the consequences? The river overflows. But internal governance means the dam is built inside your own mind.
The author notes that this framework turns the human body from public property into a governed sacred domain. You aren't just managing your urges through a risk-benefit analysis, you know.
No, you are actively recognizing that desire itself stands under a higher command.
You recognize that just because something can be desired does not mean it may be pursued.
And this raises an important question, which leads directly to Neymoten's sharpest, most piercing critique of modern society. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see what the author views as a massive civilizational irony.
He calls it the secular misstep.
Precisely. Over the last century, in the name of autonomy, liberation, and personal freedom, modern secular culture systematically dismantled these traditional religious restraints.
He just tore them down.
Yeah. Society looked at frameworks like TED and labeled them repressive, archaic, and suffocating.
But, and this is the absolute crux of the tragedy described in the tech society, dismantled the tool used to govern the drive, but they couldn't dismantle the biological drive itself.
We removed the dam, but the river kept flowing with the exact same primal force.
It's wild when you think about it like that.
It is. The author points out that we traded the ancient language of holiness, of moral limit, of the sacred and the forbidden, for what he calls weak, managerial, and therapeutic language.
Let's ground that a bit because it's a crucial distinction. What exactly does he mean by managerial and therapeutic language?
It means we reduced profound moral questions to mere logistics and emotional management.
Like HR speak, almost.
Exactly. Instead of saying, this action violates the sacred dignity of another human being, we say, did we successfully navigate the boundaries of mutual consent?
Right.
We talk about managing urges, mitigating risk, and ensuring no one feels emotionally harmed. We treat interpersonal relationships like contract law, rather than addressing the individual as a moral being accountable to a higher authority.
And the result, according to Neymoten, is that we are now trying to fight a primal biological force with severely weakened, almost bureaucratic instruments.
Yeah.
And because of this, modern society is caught in this exhausting, hypocritical oscillation. On one hand, the culture pushes total sexual permissiveness. It says the drive should be liberated, friction-free, constant.
Right, anything goes.
But then, on the other hand, Society is hit with sudden, panicked moral outrage when that ungoverned, celebrated demand inevitably leads to widespread exploitation, abuse, and sexual slavery.
We actively removed the internal layer of restraint, and now we look around, completely baffled, wondering why our external enforcement, the police, the laws, the awareness campaigns, feels so fragmented and overwhelmed.
It's because the center no longer holds.
The internal anthropological agreement on what restraint even means has been completely hollowed out.
So how does the author propose we fix this? He poses the titular question, right? Sitting at round two, can we actually bring this architecture of restraint back into a world that has largely abandoned it?
Well, he is very clear that it cannot be simplistic or reactionary. You cannot just mandate a hollow theatrical reintroduction of old dress codes or behavioral rules without the underlying spiritual core.
Because then it's just surface level.
Exactly. If you sever the rules from a genuine belief in God, he warns, it just degenerates into social control and moral policing.
It just becomes another external system. It becomes the town building a slightly taller wall out of sandbags.
Yep. It fails for the exact same reasons civil law fails. It doesn't reach the inner theater. A genuine round two requires a profound cultural shift in how we speak to each other.
A completely new or old vocabulary.
Right. It requires reintroducing moral language that secular society has largely discarded. The unapologetic language of dignity, of absolute limit, of sacredness, and of obligation.
And the text emphasizes that it requires men, in particular, to be addressed not just as biological consumers whose urges simply need to be safely managed and compartmentalized.
But as moral beings.
Yes. As moral beings who are commanded by something greater than themselves to govern their own nature. It requires a willingness, as the author beautifully puts it, to move society a little toward God.
And he acknowledges this isn't some magic utopian fix. I mean, religious societies have profound issues with abuse and hypocrisy, too. The architecture can definitely be corrupted.
Right, humans are still humans.
But he argues that in the face of a drive, this ancient and this strong, mere secular management is just not enough. The vulnerable people being exploited right now cannot wait for us to perfect our progressive theories.
They need help now.
We need an internal culture of restraint, or we will always be chasing the horrific consequences instead of actually governing the causes.
So what does this all mean? Let's take a step back and summarize this incredibly dense, challenging journey we've just taken through Namoten's paper.
Yeah, let's recap.
The core of the argument is that external laws, progressive educational campaigns, and justified moral outrage are simply not enough to combat the horrors of sexual exploitation. They fail because they only treat the symptoms. They do not and physically cannot address the internal biological engine of demand.
They fight the agents of exploitation, but they leave the primal force that sustains those agents entirely untouched.
And the author posits that only an internalized architecture of moral and spiritual restraint, exemplified historically by the Jewish concept of snit, has the psychological gravity to actually govern that primal force from within the human psyche.
From within the inner theater.
Yes. And I want to ask you, the listener, to reflect on your own life for a moment. Regardless of your personal religious belief, think about your own internal theater. How much of your behavior, your restraint, your ethics is governed purely by external forces?
Like the laws of your country or social expectations of your peers.
Right. Or the fear of losing your job or getting caught. And how much is governed by an internal, non-negotiable architecture of principles that you would follow even if you were completely invisible?
That's a tough question to answer, honestly.
It is. But understanding this paradigm shift from external management to internal governance is profoundly valuable when we look at how society attempts to solve its deepest, darkest crises.
It is a sobering, absolutely necessary lens. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, one that builds directly on the author's premise, but pushes it into our immediate, kind of terrifying future.
Okay, what is it?
If, as Namoten argues, ungoverned biological drives naturally tend toward demand and exploitation, what happens when we introduce modern, frictionless digital technology into this equation?
Wow, that changes the physics of the river entirely.
It does. Think about it. We are dealing with an ancient biological urge, but now the digital age acts as an unprecedented, limitless amplifier for those primal appetites.
It's everywhere all the time.
It delivers access instantly, anonymously, globally, without any physical friction whatsoever. If we have a technology that accelerates demand to light speed, and we have simultaneously as a civilization discarded our internal restraints, are we rapidly approaching a point of no return.
That is terrifying.
Trying to fight the resulting scale of exploitation with external laws and police forces is no longer just like building sandbags against a flood. It is like trying to contain a nuclear reaction with a chain-link fence.
It's impossible.
The mechanisms of law simply will not be able to compute or keep pace with the sheer automated scale of the destruction.
We are building our frictionless modern world on top of a massive, ancient, and deeply volatile fault line. And no matter how many external supports we try to construct or how many policies we draft for the resulting fractures, the ground beneath us is still violently shaking.
The biological root remains.
It really does. Thanks for diving deep with us today.